everybody, this is Robin with Creative2xmom, and today's video is going to be all about our top reading picks from 2021. So welcome back to my channel. My name is Robin and this is Creative2xmom. This channel is all about homeschooling, parenthood, and thriving in the day-to-day. And today I am doing a roundup of our top reading picks from 2021. Last year I did a series of videos like this one, which I will link down below, sharing with you some of our top books from 2020. This year I thought I would put our top recommendations all in one video for you. So I'm going to be covering my favorite fiction, my favorite non-fiction, as well as our favorite read-alouds that we did in our homeschool. Now I have to admit, when I was compiling this list, I went through all of my wrap-up reading videos from the past year, and I started to really think through what were some of my favorites in each of these categories, and I was really surprised by what struck me as the ones that I wanted to recommend at the end of the year. Particularly the fiction. There was a lot of books that I pre-read for my kids that I was really excited about. I'm going to share with you. In the non-fiction category is sort of all over the place, so I was surprised at what stood out from 2021. So let's just start with the fiction category. One of my top favorites, I hesitate to say my absolute favorite, but we'll start with Thursday's Child by Noelle Streatfeild. Now, Noelle Streatfeild is very well known for her work. I believe she wrote in the 1920s, 1930s, so she's been around for a very long time. I just had never had a chance to get my hands on one of her books, and this was a republication that I was asked to review, and I was struck by how well it was written. I love classics, and going back to reading this book, I didn't expect it to be as rich and as engaging as it was. So we have Margaret Thursday, and she's so named because she was found on the church doorstep on a Thursday, and every year there is like an allowance that's left at the church for her care. So there's two elderly ladies that she lives with, and this money comes every Christmas for them to take care of her. Now they're getting on in years, and surprisingly one Christmas the money doesn't show up. I think there's a letter that's sent, if I remember correctly, and she is sent off to the orphanage, and it's all about her adventures of who she meets there and what's happening. The matron, they think, is stealing from the kids, but they don't really know, and so she's sneaking around and trying to figure it out, and her and a couple of other kids are trying to escape, and can they escape? This was so engaging that I almost forgot I was reading a children's book, and it was so well done. I had not realized what an amazing author this really was. Now, Thursday's Child left me on a cliffhanger, and I have a feeling that there's probably a second book in this series. In fact, I'm really hoping that it comes up for review so that I can read it again. This one definitely hit my top 5 for fiction. The next book I just shared with you guys a couple of weeks ago in our December reading roundup, and that was The Beginning by Beverly Lewis. Now, I was surprised by Beverly Lewis on this book because her books tend to be very, there's not a lot of action in them. Pretty predictable storyline, which is why I had slotted this book for December because I thought it would be a nice, easy read over the holidays. And it was a nice read, but there was things in this book that really surprised me. She really deviated from her typical Amish fiction storyline. We have Susie, who is helping take care of her mother and her younger sister, and the family is also trying to hang on to the family farm. Her brothers are trying to help as well, but it's just not being profitable. So there's the threat of selling the family farm, plus her younger sister is sort of coming of age right at this time, and she's asking a lot of questions about her adoption. Was she adopted outside of the Amish community? And that's not a topic that is typically addressed in Amish fiction. I don't know that it's really a part of their culture, but it was a surprise element that was brought into this book. So as much as The Beginning still had elements of Beverly Lewis's style, This was a surprisingly engaging read. There was a lot more, not necessarily action, but a lot more character development that really kept you hooked into this story. Number 3 was Pocketful of Pine Cones by Karen Andriola. And I hesitated to put this one in the fiction category or the nonfiction category because Pocketful of Pine Cones is a fictionalized journey of a homeschool mom in the, I would say, the 1920s as she is raising her kids and learning how to do nature study with them in a Charlotte Mason way. And so you are getting a lot of teaching, especially in this first one, of how to bring in nature study into your homeschool, but it's a fictionalized story of this mom and her children and how they made it work. In contrast to that Beverly Lewis book, this is a very super gentle, very wholesome, very sweetly written book. The chapters are quick and easy. I found that the best way for me to read this one was to read a chapter and then engage in some reflection of how I was going to translate that into my homeschool. So it's sort of fiction, sort of homeschool how-to, but put in a way that you don't feel overwhelmed, you don't feel completely inundated, but it's not a super engaging, gripping story. It's just very gentle and sweet. In contrast to Pocketful of Pine Cones, the next fiction book that I would recommend was Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This is a classic read, particularly in the world that we find ourselves in. I found it to be very relevant. It's one of those books that I'm kicking myself for not having read sooner. So you're entering into this world of everything has sort of been sterilized. You have classes of people that have been genetically engineered, I guess, and so you have the A class and the B class and so on and so forth, and it's almost like a caste system. So if you're in the A class, that would be the caste that you would be. These are the intellectuals of society. They are the ones who are making all the rules and having the very professional jobs. And then you go all the way down to the very lowest caste of society, that they are the ones that do all the cleanup. They're sort of your blue collar class, if you will. And there's this man who is sort of a B class, upper B class, and he goes off to what they call the reservation, and the savages live there. And these are the people who've chosen not to be genetically engineered. They've chosen to separate themselves from society and live in a very similar way that we do today. But they're considered very unintellectual. They're considered just very ignorant. And his eyes are opened to what the world has become in this sterilized existence. I have heard good things about Brave New World for a long time and really wish I would have picked it up sooner. I was a little bit intimidated by it. There is a lot of like made up words to describe things, and so you have to kind of roll with it. Even though you're not completely understanding everything that happens, it all comes together within the context. Very, very good book. I would add it to your 2022 reading list. And the last book in the fiction category is The Endless Step. This is a book that was recommended in our Story of the World Volume 4 reading for probably 7th and 8th grade. I was going to throw it in as a read aloud and we just ran out of time. But the description caught me so much I decided to read it myself, and I'm so glad I did. It's about a family who has been cast out of society to the steppe. They've been sent to a work camp because they are considered dangerous to society. They have been labeled as capitalists, and the father is very innovative. Basically, you end up following the story through a series of events. The family is separated, and you end up following the story of the grandmother, the mother, and the daughter, and what they have to do to survive, and how this whole civilization ends up developing out of these outcasts. and it's a great study into government. It's a great historical read, brings so many good elements into history, which is really what I would look for, is a great historical fiction for that middle grades years, without being too graphic, but having enough of an impact that you get a really good look at what was actually happening. Can't recommend this one highly enough. One of my personal favorite reads for the year. I was actually really surprised that that one made the list, but I'm so glad that I read it. Okay, let's talk top 5 for the nonfiction category. And this is the category that I felt like was a little bit all over the place too. A little bit of Christian living, a little bit of biography, a little bit of parenting. The number 1 book that I wrote down was Parenting Teens with Love and Logic. Now, we are very much so a love and logic family. I feel like natural consequences is definitely the way to teach your kids. But when you get into those teen years, the writing becomes more sparse, and the examples of how you handle love and logic with teenagers just really doesn't apply. The situations are totally different. The consequences are totally different. To find good parenting books about teenagers, it's really a challenging field to find good applicable advice. But Parenting Teens with Love and Logic, my favorite thing about this book was almost the entire back section of it was sections that were about 2 to 3 pages long of hypothetical situations. Say your teen is struggling with this character issue and this is what comes about from it. Here's how you deal with it. The beginning very well goes over the idea and the philosophy of love and logic, but if you've been parenting from that paradigm for much time, you already know that. It's the application and the situations and reminding yourself that it's not just their behavior, but their heart issues and how to deal with the actual root and the heart issue of each of those things. The back issue, the back section of that book would be well worth the price of the book just in and of itself. The next book that I want to share with you was actually from my roundup in September, and it was called Help, I'm Drowning by Sally Clarkson. Sally Clarkson is a phenomenal Christian author. I have read several of her books over the year. In fact, when January started, I started going back through the life-giving table, I think it is, that I'm working through. Oh, the Life-Giving Home. That's the one I'm working through right now. So she's a well-known in that Christian parenting realm. One of my favorites from her is A Waking Wonder, which I actually also shared over the summer. And as I reviewed that one in 2020, I started thinking, I wonder how she's applying some of these ideas to the very small world that we were living in 2020. Well, Help, I'm Drowning is sort of her answer to what was going on in her heart during those isolation days of how do you deal with these difficult situations in life when they're very hard heart issues. She goes through so many things and is so honest and so real. That's probably my favorite thing about Clarkson's writing, is that she's not afraid to share the mess of what's going on in her heart and how she's worked through that. Yes, at times I feel like, man, I wish I could be that responsive to the Lord's prompting, but she will share that she has struggles, that it's not all easy for her as well, that she really has to work through things. And I felt like Help, I'm Drowning was really that answer of just being very raw and very real with where she was at and how the Lord was just her provider, both her anchor and her life jacket in these difficult situations of life. The next book in the nonfiction category was talking about sexuality with teens. Now, this is a very personal and very sensitive topic for parents. It can be a struggle to talk about something that is so taboo with your teenagers, and yet, as this book reminds us, if you're not talking about this with your teens, someone else is. And who would I rather share real factual information with my kids than myself. And so this book was a great guide, not so much a script or a formulaic approach to the topic, as much as it was an encouragement and things to make you think, like, this is in the media, this point of view is in the media, how have you addressed it as a family? Which I think is great. I didn't feel like the author was so much pushing a viewpoint, although it is obvious what the viewpoint is, as much as saying, the world is telling your kids this, what have you told your kids? Where are you leading your children? You need to be ahead of this curve before someone else shares this with them. Really well done book on a very tough subject. I believe this one was a review book, so if I can find my full written review, I will link it down below. But absolutely the best book I've seen written on this topic. Number 4 in the nonfiction category is In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. This is a book that I just shared, I think last month, a couple weeks ago, in our December roundup, and it is the story of Yeonmi Park and her escape from North Korea, where she and her mother are then trafficked in China. They think that they are escaping to freedom, and ultimately they are trafficked throughout China, so they have to escape China, and everything that's involved in that is she's trying to reunite her family. Very, very heavy weight put on this 12 to 13-year-old girl, and she really pulls back the veil and reveals what is happening in some of these closed, tight countries. So I think I'm going to put In Order to Live on my teenagers' reading lists, just to give them a perspective of what's going on in the world, get them out of their own limited viewpoint and open up their world. The last book in the nonfiction category is Family Driven Faith by Vodi Bakum Jr. This is my first exposure, my first read of Vodi Bakum, and I was absolutely not disappointed. His passion for biblical parenthood, strong families really comes through in this book. If you have any interest in reading his work, I think this would be a great place to start. He really casts a vision of what sort of legacy for family and biblical raising and teaching our children do we want to leave. It's more of a broad picture read for me. There are a few things that he believes that I don't entirely believe with, but his vision and his passion for the family and for family ministry and for raising very biblically sound, healthy adults comes through in this book. I'm really anxious to read other titles of his, particularly Fault Lines has been on my reading list for about a year. I'm trying to get my library to order it because I think that would be a really good one. So the last category I want to share with you is our top 5 for our family read alouds. The first one is called Shadow on the Mountain. This is a book that my mom purchased for my eldest son, who's not much of a reader, and so I kind of put it on our family read aloud list. And it covers the story of a young boy spy in Norway as the Nazis have invaded, and what he has to do, what his experience is like. Oh yeah, you're gonna join us. What his experience is like in who he can trust, who he has to keep safe by not revealing his true identity and what he's really doing. It's not that he can't trust them, but he has to protect them. Very great fictionalized account of what was happening, and as we got to the end of the book, I found out that it is based on a true story, so even better. I love it. The next read aloud that we really enjoyed was from the Heroes of History series about Theodore Roosevelt. This is a very well written series of books. In fact, we have listened to the audiobook about Milton Hershey, Abraham Lincoln, and I think George Washington. There have been several that we have listened to. And Theodore Roosevelt has always held a special place in my heart due to his love of nature and adventure and being outdoors. So I was really excited to read this one. I felt like we learned an awful lot about Theodore Roosevelt and his passions and his excitement for learning and growing. He was one of those men that throughout this story, I found that he really inspired my kids to keep learning, to keep growing, to keep looking for new things to discover. He's had such a zeal and excitement for life, which I really appreciate. Really well written book, definitely among our top favorites. This author has a great way of writing biographies that makes them really engaging, and so this being the fourth one that we've read in this series, I'm anxious to find other titles. Number 3 in our read aloud list was War Horse. And this is the story of a horse who has been sold to the army, separated from the boy that he loves, and it's seeing World War I through his eyes. The riders that he develops relationships with, the other horses that he develops relationships with. Felt like this was a good book for introducing the idea of these world wars without being too heavy, too graphic. It's written for a good preteen age without being too startling, because you're getting it from the point of view of the horse who's trying to make sense of everything that's happening. It's honest and it's real without being too much, and so it was one that really engaged all of us that we enjoyed. Number 4 in our read aloud list would be A Night Divided. This is the story of a family who is planning their escape from Berlin. The father and one of the brothers goes to check out opportunities, and overnight the border closes. So the mother and the older son and the daughter are trapped and separated from the rest of their family. All connection is cut off. They can't even communicate with each other, and they're stuck. And you get in this situation of how the media was controlled, how the communication was controlled. You didn't dare say anything because you didn't know who was on what side. Even if you had strong relationships, they might sell you out just for favor, for being able to have a little bit more freedom of their own. And you couldn't blame them, because you knew how desperate that situation was. These characters really draw you in to the emotions and the desperation that they feel, the fear that they feel, because you never know who's listening, you never know who's watching or what could happen. And it is the desperate attempt of this family to be reunited with the rest of the family in freedom. How can they get out? And they have one shot at getting out, one shot where they cannot be found out. So well done. We read this book last spring, so it's been almost a year, and the story has really stayed with me that entire time that I had to recommend this one to you guys. And number 5 in our read aloud list was The Green Ember. This book came as a huge surprise to me. I wasn't sure if we would like it. I told the kids, I said, well, let's just try it. If we don't like it, we'll put it to the side. We became so engaged in this story. This is the story of an underground world of rabbits who are fighting for their kingdom, that they have taken on this enemy of the wolves and the ravens, and you never, again, it's sort of like a spy story. There's hidden people who are spying on you in this underground rabbit world. You don't know who you can trust, and secret identities come out. People who don't even know they have secret identities come out. It's this whole unknown, mystical, magical realm. It had sort of the feel of Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, these great big epic sweeping realms and kingdoms, and who is aligned with who and what rabbits have sold out. There's actually traitor rabbits who've sold out to the enemy. We loved this book so much. We continued on throughout the entire series. I think there's 4 titles that we read. The first one was absolutely the best, but for each one of them you think, okay, I think there will be enough resolution to this one that we can move on after this. No, every one of those books leaves you on a cliffhanger to where you have to read the whole thing to feel satisfied with it. And I think that is the sign of a great author. If they can keep you hanging on for that long, keep you on a cliffhanger of each one of them, and you're so engaged in this fight for freedom. Excellent, excellent series. So those are our top picks from 2021. I had a few surprises in there that I was even surprised made the list. I thought, well, that was a really good book, but Was it? Yes, they absolutely rose to the top. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know, have you read any of these, or are you interested in any of them? Some of them were really, really amazing, and I can see ourselves going back to several of them, probably the Green Ember series at some point. And just talking about them today make me want to reread a few myself. I hope you guys enjoy this video, and we will see you next time. Bye guys.